The biggest earnings report of this earnings season is upon us. Nvidia will report Q4 earnings after the market closes on Wednesday. And with the whole AI hype cycle in full force, expectations are quite high. Now, as we've seen in previous earnings report, the day before, a couple of days before, suddenly we see some weakness in the stock. Could the same thing happen now? And then we see a double beat and a race, and suddenly the stock pops back up? Could very well be, because currently the stock is down 6% at the time of making this video. The company has a market cap of $1.68 trillion, a forward PE of 33.2 times. Now, as you can see, if we look at the analyst price target, the average price target, it has been consistently going up and up and up, and has actually been higher than the actual price of this stock for quite a while. More recently, we have seen the stock surpass the average price target of analysts, and suddenly you hear analysts increasing their price target. $800, $900, $1,000, $1,100. All of that before an earnings report. I rather see most of the analysts wait for the earnings report and the earnings call and then make up their mind, instead of doing it a week before the earnings report just to push up the stock a little bit more. To me, it just doesn't make much sense. Now, as we've previously seen and said in various Nvidia videos, just because the stock is up so much does not make the company extremely expensive. On the contrary, if we look at Nvidia today on a forward PE, EV to EBITDA, price to sales, price to free cash flow, if you look at PE and EV to EBITDA in the next 12 months, it is cheaper, actually quite a lot cheaper compared to its 5-year mean. It is true that if you look at price to sales and price to free cash flow, that is a bit more expensive. But still, you would have assumed that the stock being up 200% year over year, 37% year to date, would have been more expensive than that. I mean, we've seen other companies that are trading at much higher valuation, and nobody's talking about that. Nvidia, actually, the business itself has just been growing so fast that the stock has had to play catch up for quite a while. Now, again, that does not mean that it's extremely cheap. No, I think the expectations are still quite high despite the continued momentum in AI applications, software, hardware, data center, you name it. I do still think it's still early days. I do still think that we are in a phase of building infrastructure, which again, Nvidia plays the hardware part of things and the software part of things. The hardware part of things is still in its, let's say, first, second phase. Software, the ball is starting to roll and become bigger and bigger and bigger. I fully expect the software part of the business to become quite large for Nvidia going forward, whether it's with SDKs, Omniverse, CUDA, you name it. Now, before I look at the expectations, if you enjoy this type of videos, leave it a thumbs up, subscribe if you have not, really appreciate that. Of course, we're going to cover the earnings report right when that comes out. I'll maybe even do a live stream for the earnings call, so if you're interested in that, do stick around. And if you want to support me even further, do check out the link down in the description and in the pinned comment to get the top 10 best stocks to buy now, or go to fool.com/couchinvestor. Thank you very much. Now, currently what you're seeing here are consensus numbers. So the market, let's say, is expecting Nvidia to report at least $20.53 billion. Nvidia itself guided for $20 billion plus minus 2%. Now, this would mean a year-over-year growth here of 239.4% year-over-year and 13.34% quarter-over-quarter, which also means, yes, quarter-over-quarter growth is a bit slowing down, but I mean, year-over-year, the performance here is still quite impressive. And I've even seen some analysts say that for Q1, they expect Nvidia to guide for $25 billion in revenue, meaning that quarter-over-quarter, you're going to see a reacceleration. Let's see what happens. I do expect them to have a double beat and a beat on guide as well. How much? I don't know. Then when it comes to net income adjusted, year-over-year growth of 428.9%, reaching close to $11.5 billion. That would also be up 14.75% quarter-over-quarter. EPS adjusted and GAAP supposed to be $4.63 and $4.22 respectively. Again, the year-over-year performance here is quite exceptional, and even quarter-over-quarter quite respectable as well. 15% for adjusted and 13.64% increase quarter-over-quarter on a GAAP basis. If we look at, in my opinion, the most important part of all of this, cash from operations and free cash flow expectations there, $10.26 billion, an increase of 489.94% year over year, and an increase of 45.5% quarter over quarter. I mean, if you look at the difference between Nvidia, even in the last 3 quarters, when it comes to free cash flow, and Nvidia beforehand, they barely reached 1.5, $1.6 billion or so. Now 6, 7, 10, and that is supposed to continue like that for the coming quarters. That's the expectations. Now looking at Nvidia's revenue by market platform, so of course, data center still expected to grow the fastest out of the others. Actually, gaming, they said it's supposed to be the weaker part of the business for this quarter, so that's already their prediction. So not be surprised if gaming is coming a bit weaker than expected. Professional visualization was up 10% quarter over quarter, 108% year over year. Automotive, while still a small part of the business, if you truly believe that cars are computers on wheels, if you truly believe that Nvidia might be a big player when it comes to autonomous vehicles, then you probably know that this is a segment where that will be extremely, extremely big and extremely profitable in the future. So overall, what we're expecting is data center, again, to take the biggest chunk here, year over year increase, quarter over quarter increase, and the rest to grow in line, gaming seeing some weakness. Now, I do want to touch on this comment that they made last quarter, just so we don't forget. So because of all the, let's say, new rules, regulations, sanctions, you might say, with AI chips and where they can or cannot be sold. So they talk here about the licensing requirements. They did not have a meaningful impact on their revenue in the third quarter of fiscal 2024, which was last quarter, as they were announced near the end of fiscal quarter and we had additional demand for customers outside the named country groups. Our sales to China and other affected destinations derived from products that are now subject to licensing requirements have consistently contributed approximately 20 to 25% of data center revenue over the past few quarters. We expect that our sales of these destinations will decline significantly in the fourth quarter of fiscal 2024, which is the quarter they report tomorrow, though we believe the decline will be more than offset by strong growth in other regions. This is something I talked about when I went over the earnings report the last time, and to be honest, I'm quite interested to see how this has impacted their quarter and especially how this will impact them moving forward. Because fine, maybe one quarter the growth from the other regions can offset that 20-25% hit. But what about the next coming quarters, maybe even year? Do we get a bit more information about that? How do they manage to tackle that? Is there any other way for them to still increase their revenue even in those regions? I know there are some chips that can be sold. There are some ways, but I would love to see some more information about that. It's going to be very, very interesting. Now, overall, we know we've talked about that before. Nvidia, number one player, doesn't matter what we hear. I know there are plenty of articles coming. Big tech companies, I made a video about big tech companies, of course, not really enjoying the fact that they're paying a huge premium to Nvidia for their chips. Most of the big tech players are already working on their own chips. More recently, we had another article come out with regards to Microsoft, with regards to network cards. They're trying to undercut Nvidia, let's say, but at the same time, every big tech company will still be buying Nvidia's products. Why? Because they are the best in the market, whether it's hardware or software. And by the way, it also takes quite some time to go from idea, design, manufacturing, and then supplying the goods. It just doesn't happen overnight. Nvidia knows it, the competitors knows it, their client know it as well. Just take all of that into consideration when we hear or when we see those headlines. Things don't move that fast, especially not when we talk about manufacturing of chips. Maybe in the future things will go faster if Sam Altman gets his $7 trillion budget. Who knows? But currently, don't expect things to change so fast, so drastically. And so if we look at the charts right now, Nvidia clearly has reached a top at $740. This is on the daily, by the way. Moving very, very close to the 20-day moving average at around $670 or so. Now not overbought anymore. RSI is still pretty high. If you're interested, the next moving average, the 50-day one, sits at around $600 and the 200-day moving one sits at around 467 or so. If we go and look at the weekly, we are still overbought there. Again, remains to be seen what happens, of course, with the earnings report. The expected move is 11%. Can be on the upside, can be on the downside. But overall, my expectations are pretty clear. Another very strong quarter by Nvidia, probably a double beat, and even a raise in guidance. But I do still think that the market will just listen to the comments that Nvidia makes, maybe not for Q1, but what happens maybe in the back half of this year going into 2025. I know it's still early, but with everything that's happening with AI, I do think that's what most investors, most analysts will be wanting to hear. Do share your expectations down in the comments below. If you enjoy this type of videos, leave it a thumbs up, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.